Yeah, and then wait for it. So now if we want to, we can, now if we want to, we can, actually draw on the screen to exemplify what we're talking about. So if I was like, if I was talking about like maybe even um, a neural network or something, I could go like that and like control layer or like to exemplify neurons, and then maybe like illustrate what I'm talking about. Like watch the screen. You see that? The red dot yet? So we can use that like a pointer, um, and then yeah, I could go like 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and go bum, 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 um, bum, bum. Exemplify a fully connected dense layer if I wanted to. Yeah, so just a useful tool if we need to.
Oh, for sure. Over time, I definitely want to get good
Get good.
because drawing. I'm definitely
Well, if we could have a tablet up like with this kind of thing, so that we could like do that, maybe even like have information prompts and whatnot on there too. Like that's why I really want to build our own software because I want a way for all of that stuff. There should be a way for all that stuff to be on one screen. Like you have a top bar with like scenes or something like that. You have a button that lets you just switch to telestrator mode versus like a script mode versus like a webcam view, mode. That way you can kind of like as you need to, you can easily cycle through these modes. These things are just so poorly designed. All right. Well, for anybody that's listening, because our mics are on, we are going to switch to our starting student screen. We're going to do an audio test,
Yeah.
and then we are going to go live. So we will see you shortly.
And we're live.
Well, we are actually going to do a quick audio test
Oh,
here
right.
because I forgot to do that. So yeah, let's do an audio test and make sure that we got everything up and working. Then we'll switch back, and then we'll switch right back.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's test this out. Test.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hello.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I caught a fish that laughs.
Noise. Group scene, so we can do another test. Do another testing. 1, 2, 3 with Jacob's Mike's new position.
All
He
right.
got hired as CEO, and we're really excited for it.
Yes.
This new position was one of prominence.
So good.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you do well at your job. If not, you're gonna get fired. But
Mhm.
okay.
Yep.
But I can't really afford to fire you, so you're gonna have to make do. Pressure's on, but I know you can. I know you can achieve it.
I'll give you your 2 weeks notice.
Test.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Testing. 1, 2,
Testing.
3.
This is a
Testing.
comparison with Ryan's mic. How does Jacob's mic sound? Is it loud enough?
I don't know. Does this mic sound loud enough? I think it should.
We will find out
Certainly
soon.
gain up a little
Find
bit.
out next time on ThetaWave Podcast.
ThetaWave.
Oh yeah.
No, we really need our own theme song.
Just testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Test. Test. 1, 2, 3.
Jacob, give me a test.
Test.
Mm.
Test.
Mm. Yeah.
Test. Ooh. Hello, welcome to your mom's house.
We are 4 years old.
Yeet. Booyah.
Yoink.
Anyhow, I've had it up to here with your dilly-dallying.
Hey everyone, welcome to ThetaWave podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Reed. I am a AI engineer as well as a neuroscience researcher, musician, and songwriter. And I'm here with my co-host, Jacob Holland, who is also a neuroscience researcher and insatiably curious.
Insatiably.
Yes, Jacob, what do we have going on today?
All right. So I think we're going to have a pretty good one today. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about the neuroscience of language, which is quite the fascinating topic. I know you think it's boring somewhat, but personally, I would be down to study this stuff for my entire career. I'm being honest. I think it's one of the main driving factors behind how we've been able to be so advanced is because we're able to convey such personal meaning and be able to represent it in a way that is beneficial for everyone. So it's gonna be an interesting topic. And then your topic, if I'm not mistaken, it's called random random tree
Random
random
forest
forestry
tree ensemble.
random forestry ensemble, which I personally have no clue what the heck that is, but I'm really
I don't
curious to
blame
find
you.
out. It's
And just to be clear, I don't find the brain's the brain's um the brain's language mechanisms boring.
he just doesn't want to make a career out of it.
I just wouldn't want to solely study the language mechanisms because I think that there are a lot more interesting areas of the brain.
Yeah, I guess so.
So,
The basic ganglia.
what is our
Oh, okay.
neuroscience or our nootropic topic?
Nootropic topics. All right, so we've got a pretty interesting one. It's called DSIP, or delta sleep induced peptides, which have some pretty
Ooh.
interesting implications for like symptom withdrawal, stress, as well as Parkinson's and
Ooh.
Alzheimer's.
And then, of course, sleep.
Sleep. Yep. And its mechanisms behind sleep are also pretty interesting as well because it's not just your average sleep inducing drug.
Mm.
So
So stay tuned to find out more.
stay tuned to the second half. So yeah.
Also, what's interesting too is that that's a portion of the nootropic element that a lot of people miss because it's not as its effects are not as cognitively visible when you're awake.
Yeah.
The sleep element, though, to kind of the cognitive learning processes
Mhm.
and how important that is. Because right now, as inconvenient as sleep can be, sometimes, it does play an important role in the integration of new information
Yeah.
and memories.
Mhm.
And without it, your ability to retain things dramatically diminishes.
Yes. And it's just overall capacity to help with long-term health, especially in its minimization of free radicals. So we're going to dive a little
Yeah.
bit more into that later, but I think let's start with a little bit about the neuroscience of language here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Take us away.
it's quite the interesting process. If you've done intro to neuroscience, neuroscience 101, you've obviously heard of Broca's area and Wernicke's area. I'm going to talk about those first because those are kind of like the mainstream, more popular areas in the brain. So the Broca's area, right? It was discovered by Paul Broca in 1861, and he was working on a patient who had a lesion to the left part of his frontal lobe, and he noticed that disruptions in this particular area caused him not to be able to produce speech. And he thought that was very fascinating because he was able to understand meaning, he was able to write, he was able to do all these other things, but he wasn't able to be able to convey the meaning outwards in a vocal way.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of the basis for how we understood the production of speech. And it's a little more integrated than that. And you'll see that, there's a lot of connections with like the premotor cortex as well as the primary motor cortex. It's the Broca's area is majorly involved, if not the main factor when it comes to moving our mouths, being able to move it in complex and correct ways that are able to, form a syntax, form a type of semantic morphology that allows us to convey what we need to. And so that happened. And then 15 years later, it was 1875, I forgot his first name, but Wernicke, he was also working on brain lesions, and he's discovered in the left side of the left part of the brain in the temporal lobe. I think it's the parietal temporal lobe. The yeah. he found that disruptions in this area caused something that was also a major component, which was the semantics, the meaning behind words.
Hmm.
And he noticed that people who had lesions in this area were able to produce speech super fluently and able to talk without even a stutter. But there was absolutely no substance to what they would say. And as well as they weren't able to really comprehend the words coming back at them. And so from there was kind of those 14 years was kind of the basis for how we understood how language was really being produced and as well as the comprehension aspects of how we produce it. And there's the arcuate bacillus. This is the main kind of nerve pathway that connects these two.
Now, for those that don't know, where does the parietal temporal lobe reside?
The parietal temporal lobe, it's 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 close to your auditory cortex. It's if you like touch the top of your ear and then kind of like go a little bit higher and then a little more forward, kind of almost right before your temple.
Hmm.
That's kind of the area where on the left side of your brain, that's kind of where the Wernicke area lies.
Cool. Okay.
So yeah, as I'm speaking right now, my Wernicke and Broca's area is going overtime. Really working
Now
overtime.
I'm just imagining you have like glowing electricity, like going like over the top of your ears right now. Like,
I know, seriously. And it kind of gets interesting, right? Uh, because in those huge areas, we think that's where language resides in the brain. And very traditionally, we focused on just these two areas. But what's interesting is that through like neuroimaging techniques and like fMRI, like PET scans, revealed that language processing is far more distributed and dynamic than we ever thought. And it's not about just these kind of isolated regions that are working in conjunction with each other, but a distributed symphony of all of these different major areas of the brain that are working together to create this neural symphony that happens in a very synchronous and simultaneous manner.
right, because
Yeah.
you have not only the motor cortex that's involved in the movements and this formulation of the sounds and whatnot, but you also have, I'm assuming, like a lot of hippocampal elements that are also needing to play a part in this, like a lot of your memory,
Mhm.
your verbal, memory that has to play a part in this as well. Um, and then also, I'm assuming you also have some sort of emotional, uh, context there that you're using
Yes.
to kind of
Mhm.
transform the way that
Yes,
that is presented.
because, a lot of the different ways that we use to kind of express ourselves in a conscious way, when it comes to our emotions and how we feel and what we know and what we experience. All of these things are stored and are functioning in various different areas, like in so many different regions, subregions, and all of these very intricate networks. And we have to be able to take that and use whatever is necessary to then translate that back into semantic meaning to be verbally expressed. And that those networks are very comprehensive, very connected,
Mm,
and even if it's not even a primary connection, those secondary connections, like even like the visual cortex, has those connections where you're able to take what you see, what the depth, everything that comes to understanding spatial navigation and spatial perception, you're able to take it and then through secondary inferences, able to break that down into words. And that's kind of one of the major things about language is that it's able to be so insanely comprehensive. Hence why, we're able to use language in such a diverse way and why it's able to even be used in the most complex topics and be able
mm.
to simplify it and make it parsimonious within like each and every person who could listen to it, who could understand and comprehend the words themselves, could then form together that string of logic that, in essence, is incredibly complex, but we've made it parsimonious because of the language abilities that humans have,
Mhm.
which is so
Mhm.
phenomenal. I mean, that ability is just insane. And
So was a lot of was a lot of that, I guess, as a kind of a um, more of a biological side of things, but was a lot of that a uh, a evolutionary development that happened as a result of the formation eventually first of tribes and then of like societies and cultures and whatnot, and that kind of that gravitation towards a pack,
Mhm.
like, kind of that we evolved to um, cultivate over time. And because, initially very like kind of almost solo, pretty much,
Yeah, I mean,
lone.
if you look at, kind of the earliest moments of humans in the past 4 million years, we've only really been walking in the past had we kind of put that actually an incredibly new thing,
Hmm.
respectively to how long this whole process has been going on, and which is interesting. There are genetic factors that are at play, like FOXP2, which is the main genetic or the main gene that is used for language understanding. You can even see it starting to work when it comes to forming the patterns or recognizing patterns of mothers in the womb. So
Hmm.
it's starting to understand even like vocals and inflections, kind of like it's not really forming any like words yet, but it's forming kind of the baseline for that necessary development. And because there's such a like a specific range of time, like as a child, that you need in order to learn language, it
Hmm.
needs that proper um kinda setting the stage for that development. And then you also have Novo1, which is another gene that plays a really vital role in not in memory, in language. And there were some rat studies done with Novo1 with, mothers and their rats. So pretty much what happened was they would it's it had some actually very interesting epigenetic implications as well, but they would they would insert, Novo1 gene transcriptions into the baby rats,
Hmm.
and they noticed that there would be more that they were higher pitched, they would have more diverse ranges of vocal inflections and able to communicate better, and would actually, over time, be able to, actually have more of a relation with the mother rat that would then cause a sort of spiral down this really weird path of actually changing the software of the mother to be more responsive to the care of the children rats,
Hmm.
and then would end up causing the rats to grow up and then form that same special bond, but even better and quicker that actually helped with even better,
So
like, translations.
epigenetic
Yeah.
development. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that was passed down through the generations, and then adding Nova 1 even helped increase that initially, and then furthered that along, um, across generations.
Hmm.
And so you can kind of view the same you can kind of, like, imply that that's kinda what happened with humans as well with FOXP2. We like, it's quite common in birds and different mammals, but what's different is that we actually have a slightly altered sequence that allows for more rapid progression in language comprehension and
Hmm.
understanding, hence why we were able to kinda, like, shoot up in the dominance ladders because we could communicate so well with each other and form like there's the ant hive mind, right? And they all work
Hmm.
in conjunction together, but we are far bigger. We're the largest creatures that are able to work in such a complex dynamic as well as a personal one. So it gives us this really large advantage because of this alteration in the FOXP2 gene. And then adding the Nova1 gene into that factor as well, being able to have that emotional component of inflictions and vocal range adds to that complexity as well. And so there's genetic factors, there's environmental factors, like it's not purely genetic, like 80% of it is environmental.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if you don't learn language in that vital age range, you're not gonna be able you might at the a lot later through speech therapy be able to, use some words, but you're not gonna be able to use it well,
Yeah.
you know? So, that's kind of
I
the
heard
basics.
I heard somebody describe or explain epigenetics in a really interesting way that kind of stuck in my brain. But they described epigenetics as like a adjustable cap on top of genes that allow it to be kind of tuned in allowing certain genes to be modified externally
Mhm.
rather than internally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty much manipulating which genes can be turned on or turned off based on the
Based on environmental
environment.
factors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of an overview of kinda like the neurobiological basis, the evolutionary kind of history of how it developed in the genetic one. So yeah, that's the neuroscience of language.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
That actually, probably has a lot more complex interplay than most people imagine.
Oh my gosh. I mean, actually, it sounds like, "Oh, wow, we really know what's going on in the brain here."
Hmm.
I haven't even scratched the surface of what we know, and the entirety of what we know hasn't even scratched the surface of what there actually is.
Hmm.
And
It's
so
it's like when I use the term like high level to describe a programming sense. It the view that you're giving is like even as comprehensive as it is a high level view of everything without delving into like the complex substructures that go to make up that functionality and allow it to work and everything. So it's like a like with even how complex all of that was, you could have delved so much more into those underlying complexities
yeah,
and just like kind of almost like this infinite
it's such a rabbit hole.
expansion. And that's one of the reasons actually I love programming. Probably one of the reasons I love neuroscience too, is the never ending like cap to
Yeah.
the knowledge. It's like you can learn everything there is to know about it, and by the time that you do that, there's more to know about it. Like,
I mean, people don't realize that we're really just at the beginning of understanding these very complex, you know, things like programming and neuroscience. We know very little about the brain. We know very little of what we can potentially accomplish with computers and algorithms. Like
hmm,
we're at the tip of the iceberg.
right,
People think we're already going too far.
yeah.
Just like give it 30 years and you are
Just wait
going
till
your
like
mind's gonna be blown, dude.
quantum computing is consumer level and see how that changes humanity as a whole. Like that level of computing capability opens up is like it's like it would be the equivalent of the next um the next internet revolution, like
Mhm.
like how the internet quickly transformed our society and our information
Yeah.
processing and intake and whatnot, and how fast that happened. Like you take from like I don't know 19 around somewhere between 1995 and 2000 when that stuff was starting to get starting to be actually used, and then um, look at the progression, and the development and
Mhm.
how quickly it's revolutionized, and changed
Yeah.
society and also developed technology along with it. That is almost an exponential growth factor there for humanity
Mhm. Oh,
and society.
100%.
Now you take that level of revolution and like impact and exponentially scale it. So you have an exponentially scaled impact on top of an exponentially scaling process.
Yeah.
And that is how much like consumer level quantum computing I'd imagine will influence our society. So we just in like maybe 30 years, 20 years, or even less, perhaps we might not even recognize
Mhm.
like, our selves. Like if
Mhm.
we were to see
Oh
ourselves,
my gosh.
10, 20 years from now,
Yeah.
it would be, we might be so far along that we can't even really imagine where we'll be at. You know?
Like, if people from 40 to 50 years in the future were to interact with us now with their technology, it would kind of like an uncontacted tribe looking at like a drone show, you know? That's kind of like the
Yeah.
representation it would look like. You just be like, "Oh,
Like,
the end
what?
is near."
Like, I've never seen these birds before. Why are they buzzing?
I know, exactly. So, it's gonna be interesting, and there's I actually for a while, I was like, "There's no way quantum computers are ever gonna be, like, consumerly available." But, and I know that Microsoft's kinda lied about their topological states of matter when it comes to its ability to quantum compute, but it's garnered a lot of attention. There's a lot of research still going on in that state of development, and what I think is that with these, um, more topological states that are able to, have more of a concentrated and more, um, available amount of subatomic particles to interact and form better connections while maintaining quantum coherency, I think that if that's able to be continued, we might actually be able to get to a a consumer level quantum computer, potentially. Now,
What?
is there gonna be any need for that? I'm not sure, but we'll see how it all works out.
Yeah, I don't doubt that we'll eventually get to a consumer level quantum computer, and I'm sure it'll be, well within my lifetime that will happen.
Oh, yeah,
But
definitely.
I mean, aside from the fact that I plan on living forever, like, I'm sure it'll be well within my lifetime. What did you mean by Microsoft's kinda lied about that?
So, if you look at it kinda shocked me too, but pretty much they actually don't have a topological quantum computer. They did something similar, but if you look at the paper that's referenced as the research, there is actually no evidence of topological states of matter. And many researchers and scientists have come out that actually study this and been like, this isn't what a topological state of matter is. It's close. It's good research, but it's not there yet. And it almost seemed like a half
Are
publicity
you
stunt.
sure that, like, it wasn't just misrepresented by the media that misinterpreted the findings and what they were saying by saying, like, it's that, like, Microsoft found a, topological, like, whatever,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
And, it's interesting because we're getting to the point where we can, like, freeze light, it can be like a super solid state of matter, so, like, it makes sense for
Take a
there to
minute to
be.
appreciate how profound that statement just
Ugh,
was. We're
yeah.
getting to the point where we can freeze light. I'm sorry, you can what?
Yeah. It's insane. And I mean, just who knows what's gonna be possible because of this, these new technologies that are emerging. And like you said, it's an exponentially increasingly rapid technological advancement that is enhanced daily by new developments when it comes to furthering our scientific and technological developments. Like it's just an ever increasing process on top of an ever increasing process that helps increase the ever increasing process of what's to come next.
Yeah.
It's just
It's
I
in a lot of ways, it's exciting, but it's also scary because it feels almost like you are on a train that keeps speeding up and doesn't have a brake.
Mhm.
And you're just like,
Yeah.
when is this going to derail? Like,
I know, yeah, that's what I was actually thinking about. I was gonna bring it up was like, I wonder if there is ever going to be a point where we kind of hit like a really big wall, like
yeah,
almost to where it would define the limit of our conscious perception of reality.
like our we would hit the, like, limit of our growth given our subjective reality experience, like the ability, our ability to experience reality.
Yeah, and I mean, who knows? We might be able to transcend even that.
Now, maybe that with that new understanding will come the ability to expand our ability to understand reality or to experience reality, like our ability.
Further,
Maybe we'll be able to find new ways of experiencing and taking in information.
I've kind of always half thought, at least it's my theory, that there is kind of this almost universal environmental pressure that's pushing towards the maximum amount of agentic harmony with an objective environment. And reaching each higher level of harmonization, you could say, will further increase the levels of, I guess, allowed interface with actual objective reality, not just this biological process that we've really only been used for, organic survival, which is very limited. And so I think being able to transcend that would be a very good thing once we get to that point of full harmonization and full realization and manipulation of all environments, like all potential aspects of all environments in the universe, all coexisting within the agentic mind. That and being able to live in that indefinitely. Once we get to that point, which I think it's totally possible, the interface of our conscious experience will radically change where there might not even be an interface, just existence within itself. And it's I think it'll be a very fascinating thing to be fully realized, especially if we're able to figure out how to live forever. We might be able to get there too.
I don't know if I would ever say that I think we'll get to a point where we don't need an interface. Like I think we'll personally, I think we'll always need an interface for our minds to, some version of reality. Now, what form that interface takes, is another question. But I just don't really see a way for us, and you don't know what you don't know, so it's difficult for me to say this with any sort of
speculative.
But like it is. I just have a hard time believing that there would be a way for our brains to exist without an interface. But yeah.
All right.
Anyway,
talk about
let's talk about random forest tree ensembles.
Ooh, okay, so what is this? It's not like an ensemble in a show, right?
Well, I mean, ensemble means something similar in both cases. It so in that way it is similar, but the
hate getting ensemble.
So this was actually first developed by Leo Bremen at the turn of the millennia in his kind of seminal paper that he published in 2001. It built upon earlier works, on his earlier works. Way to interrupt me there.
Hey, that
made me interrupt me. But it's built on his earlier works with on decision tree, or decision trees specifically, and kind of ensemble methods with those, which don't worry about if you don't understand what that means yet. But he developed this to kind of create a more robust and widely applicable algorithm here. And I realize it's a little bit like the term random forest tree ensembles might be a little bit daunting, but don't let that intimidate you. It involves terms like trees and forests. The underlying concepts, though, are really intuitive to understand and pretty easy. and really effective at solving problems. So at core, a random forest is a type of machine learning model, and specifically, it's a supervised machine learning model used for. And just to be clarify for anyone that don't know, that isn't familiar with the term supervised versus unsupervised machine learning, supervised learning basically means that you have the right answers, and you are training the model to learn how to achieve those right answers. And unsupervised learning means you don't have the right answers. In fact, you don't really have much information on the subject. You want the model to try and make sense of the information for you. And so basically, unsupervised learning tries to find patterns within the chaos. And so, with that said, this is supervised learning, a supervised learning model, and it's used for making predictions or classifications for things. You can kind of think of it like, imagine you're trying to decide whether a new musical artist will be successful, right? So you're maybe a production company, right? And you there, Jacob?
My the charger won't like charge unless it's at a very specific
Uh-oh.
angle. So I'm just like trying to fix it to make it perfect. I'm listening though.
So imagine that you're like a production company and you're trying to decide if a musical artist is going to be successful. You could ask one musical critic, maybe a friend that's overly critical of music, but for their opinion. But the thing you run into there is their judgment might be biased, might have a limited perspective. But what if, as a production company, you could ask 100 or 1,000 musical critics about their opinions on that artist? There's a chance of being successful, right?
Yeah.
Each of them with their own unique tastes and history and background and experience and whatnot. You likely get a much more reliable, accurate prediction there, right?
Definitely.
That's essentially kind of what random forest does. It does that obviously with data, but instead of relying on a single decision tree, i.e. one critic, it builds a whole forest of many different decision trees. And each of these trees looks at the data from a slightly different angle. So you remember how we were talking about last week about self-attention? I believe we were talking about last week. And how those different heads of the attention kind of look at things from different angles and whatnot. It's kind of like that through a different method, but like it's kind of like that. And the random forest basically then combines all of those decisions from that forest into a predicted output based off of kind of the overall consensus amongst the forest, you know. And to give you another kind of I guess way to relate it to something we've already gone over so far, you remember us talking about Bayesian models, right?
Yeah, a while ago. Yeah.
So Bayesian basically it tries to create this gut feeling by essentially creating a lot of different predictions amongst its available neurons. You know, like it tries to make a bunch of different types of predictions, i.e. viewing it from different perspectives, and then it tries to create this single unified gut feeling. And it does that through a different method than this does, but it's a similar process of kind of doing this, taking this sampled approach to this mass kind of crowd level approach to making predictions. Now, you might be thinking, okay, a collection of decision trees, that makes sense, but what exactly makes random forest special compared to just having a bunch of decision trees?
Yeah.
Because there are other forest methods, there are other tree methods, out there, and this is just one of those, but it is one of the popular ones, and it's one of the really good ones. The key difference lies in two main techniques that make random forest unique among other tree ensemble methods, such as gradient boosting machines or other collections of trees. And the first of those differences is this concept called bagging. Or
like at Walmart when people bag the food.
Exactly.
Give it to you.
Another term for it is bootstrap aggregation, but bagging is easier to say.
Yes, a little bit.
Imagine that we have our entire data set of musical artists and their success. Instead of giving the entire data set to each critic, right? What we do is we choose a randomly decided portion of the data set to give to each critic. So we give them a portion of the information that is chosen at random. And that is the first the first difference. So each tree receives a portion of the information, and that portion that they receive is something that is randomly chosen.
Now, I have a question.
Yes.
Kind of technical, but I'm just kind of curious. When it comes to the amount of trees and as well as the amount of data, is it better when you have more data to increase the number of trees or to increase the percentage of the data that each tree processes?
That's a good question, and there's no easy answer for it because it largely depends on the type of problem that you're tackling, as well as the complexity of the data, and that is part of where our jobs as machine learning engineers comes in, is that experimentation and optimization of those models. So generally, if you have more complex data where there's more angles to look at it from, you want to have a larger forest, right?
Yeah.
And as we'll see in a second, there's even more dimensions than that. Like you don't just choose the forest size, you also choose the amount of or the depth of the trees and like the amount of branches that they have and things like that. And so there are more decisions that can be made there to optimize that process. But the most primary element that does need to be optimized is the size of the forest. And there is going to be an optimal balance there. Too many trees becomes computationally unnecessary. Not enough trees is going to cause you to have an unbalanced view. And so, again, that's where our jobs kind of come in with that experimentation process. And there are ways of automating that, but like we do need to find those optimal parameters for each given data set.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So that was a good question. Anyway, so that's the first kind of thing that makes it unique is that random portion of the data that is chosen to feed to each tree. Now, the second thing that makes it unique is the at each step, as the information goes through the tree, right, and it's hitting these branches. So it goes through branches, right? That's why it's a decision tree. Goes through branches, and on which route it goes, branches, right? And as it's making its way through those trees, or this tree path, it goes through the tree until it reaches a leaf, which is its output point, and the each tree in a random forest tree ensemble, each tree's branches are only allowed to consider a randomly decided portion of its features. So as it goes through this model and hits the branches, it's getting the features that it can actually consider when making its decision is limited as well. It's a randomly, just like the trees parameters are limited, the branches are too. And so the reason that is important there is because with just tree randomization, if you just randomize the parameters that a tree has access to without doing it on the branch level.
Yeah.
If you just do it on the tree level, you end up with kind of only a two-dimensional variability to where trees can still come up with the same processes and solutions to things because of the lack of enough variability in the system. And so and without enough variance within that structure, just on the base level, you'll likely end up with trees that will have the same data input, and then we'll just come up with the same output as the other tree, because that's as the other trees, because that's what, given the data that they have, that's going to be their perspective, because that defines their experience. And so you want to make sure that each tree has a different experience. The way to best do that is by introducing that random variance amongst branches as the data progresses through the network. And so it forces each tree to consider things from a slightly different angle, so that no tree has the same view. And these two combined randomness elements gives it almost that three-dimensional versatility.
Yeah.
And allowing them to be really broad, have a really well-rounded, broad perspective on the features and the importance of the different elements. And for instance, by giving that random factor to the trees and the branches, what you end up with is trees starting to pick up on the important features of something because they don't have access always to the other features. So you start seeing certain trees that are producing similar results, and that gives you an indicator as to the features that are important there. And so that you really have this complex interplay amongst these tree elements. And what's even cooler about this is that you don't just have to have a single random forest, you can have a lot of random forests. So it's not just about the tree or the forest that you have. You can have multiple forests. So we can imagine these forests as the attention heads that we were talking about. Well, we can imagine almost the trees as the attention heads, and then the forest as a lot of different sets of attention. And so like you have these trees that are all looking at things from different perspectives, and you have these forests that are specifically, actually no, that what initially was right. The forests are like the attention heads, but the forests are responsible for specific components. So you might have, like, I'll give you an example with a project that I was working on. I was trying to detect photographic problems within images and the level of the problems. And so if we think about it, that's kind of a little bit of, in a lot of cases, that's kind of a little bit of an abstract, difficult to define component, because you have certain things that are like blur, that's kind of easy to quantify to an extent. But you also have other elements like that are not quite as easy to quantify, like the like artifacts. It's hard to tell exactly what is an artifact in an image if you think about it. Like what's to say if something is an artifact in an image versus something that's actually supposed to be there, like a it's like a maybe there's a slight defect on the sidewalk, like in an image that could look like an artifact too, right? And so there's a lot of these kind of these components that are a little bit difficult to quantify. So what I did was I created a random forest tree ensemble classifier that was made up of 5 different forests, each responsible for their own problem within an image. So you have a blur forest, you have like an artifact forest, you have a quality or a lighting level, and they're all responsible for learning their own problems to detect. And then you have within those each individual forest, you have a bunch of different trees which act like the critics, like the people that are responsible for making those judgment calls and coming up with a prediction on it. So as the information is moving through the trees, it has to have access to different portions of the information, and it hits, eventually hits a leaf and gets output, and then the aggregated outputs of all the trees get combined together to a single conclusion on the subject. And I created this thing, and it was pretty accurate. Like out of the different methods that I tried, there was one that was a little more accurate than it was. But surprisingly, for the amount of time that it took to train this thing, which was a pretty lightweight model,
it was pretty good.
It was pretty good. And I didn't do any parameter optimization really or anything. I just kind of base component, chose the amount of trees and whatnot, and that was it. So if I had done a little bit more parameter optimization, I very possibly could have gotten it at a level that was comparable or even better than the other model. And so these are like really, really powerful models that enable us to get this crowdsourced view and dissection of information in a similar way to things like attention invasion components, and are, like I was saying, are very quick too. Like they're not that computationally expensive to train. And one of the ways that it is able to be so accurate about things is that if for instance, if all the trees were trained on the exact same data, they'd all make the same mistakes and make the same errors. But by training the trees on making sure each tree is trained on different data, you ensure that they all make different mistakes and try to get them to all come up with similar conclusions. And so you basically minimize the effect of mistakes and take advantage of crowdsourced conclusions. And you end up through that process with a much more reliable and accurate, prediction at the end of it. So, just quickly as an analogy before I'll wrap it up here, because it's been going on for a little bit, but make it easier to understand, we've got use the analogy of a jury of different experts, maybe. So you've got a jury that's trying to determine if somebody is guilty or innocent, instead of just one jury or like a judge or something like that that's responsible for making the decision. You have 12.
Yep.
And each juror comes from a different background with different experience and different history, and might focus on different elements of the case.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why that is done, because one person has much higher probability of error based off of biases and whatnot in history than 12 does. And they're more likely to pull out the relevant information that is important to making that decision.
And there's a lot more pressure as well when it comes to making those decisions, because there's that high level of variability when it comes to those 12 judges, and each one is kind of keeping each other back.
Exactly.
That allows for
Exactly.
like, proper
It's like
conclusions.
this person has an opinion on this element of it, but this person is opposite of that person's opinion on it. So maybe that feature is not one of the important ones in the decision-making factor, because they have there's so much varying opinion on this specific feature. But they all seem to agree. Most of them seem to agree on this element of it.
Yeah, find the underlying patterns that are most important.
Exactly. And so that's where that kind of that error minimization and crowdsourced, prediction utilization comes in. Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway, yeah, that's random forest. I could go into a little more detail on how that actually works, but that's basically how it works. Yeah.
Nice.
It's pretty intuitive to understand.
Yeah, actually, it really, especially going over the past topics we've gone over, and if you haven't, go check out those podcasts. If you want to really, intuitive grasp on what we're talking about now, the other podcast will definitely benefit you.
Bayesian, and then the attention, which was the last one that we did. I don't think we've actually edited the attention one into a post
not
form yet, but yeah.
All right.
Do we want to take a break and then do the nootropic, or do we want to do the nootropic and take a break? What do we want to do?
Maybe we should do the nootropic now and then take a break.
Yeah.
I think that'd actually be a good idea.
I think so too. Yeah.
That'd be interesting. So I guess we're going to talk about delta sleep-induced peptides.
Yes.
Very interesting.
So we're going to be covering a fascinating research paper here, and about like you were saying, the delta sleep-inducing peptide, or as we'll kind of refer to it here as the DSIP. And I do want to say, as a quick note, the paper that we're referring to in this discussion is a comprehensive paper that we compiled to investigate and summarize the history, as well as the research, the mechanisms, and potential applications for the compound. And hopefully we'll get a website that we can post that stuff on for you, so you guys can fully delve into all of this should you want to. But for now, we're kind of just trying to take a look at it and summarize kind of some of the portions of it for you, so that to make it a lot easier, because this thing is like probably about 15 pages long. So basically, whenever we refer to the paper, that's what we're referring to. Now, Jacob, for our listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly is this peptide that we're talking about today?
Right. So DSIP, it's a naturally occurring neuropeptide. You can kind of think of it as a tiny messenger molecule in the brain and body. And the paper we're looking at calls it a nonapeptide, which simply means that it's made up of 9 amino acids linked together in a specific sequence. And so that sequence, if you want to know, it's tryptophan, alanine, glycine, aspartic acid, alanine, serine, glycine, glutamic acid. And it's quite the mouthful, but it showcases that we know really what this is and what we're talking about. And so we're able to then further manipulate it for better conclusions, which is a really good thing.
That is definitely the mouthful.
That's for sure.
And as the paper mentions, it has a molecular weight of around 850 Daltons, which, for context, is that big or is that small in the world of peptides?
Yeah, it's relatively small for a peptide. It's small enough to potentially interact with lots of various systems quite readily. And what's interesting at that is that it's amphylactic nature, meaning it can play very well with both water and fats, which is crucial for navigating various, biological systems.
So it's not just hanging around in one place, so to speak. The paper mentions it's found in the uh, the hypothalamus, the limbic system, yeah, pituitary glands, and even the gut and pancreas.
Yeah.
Um, so it sounds like it's pretty widespread.
It definitely is. Its presence in so many different areas really suggests it's involved in a lot more than just sleep, and which is what its name might initially imply. But the fact that it's found in the gut alongside glucagon, which is a key hormone for glucose metabolism, hits at a potential link to energy balance and even digestion. And these things, of course, can indirectly impact sleep uh, and even our cognitive abilities.
And from a research perspective, the paper also goes into the fact that it can be synthesized in a lab using microorganisms like E. coli, which is super important
Mhm.
for studying it extensively, to being able to synthesize it in a lab.
Yeah, so
Um,
we're able to, produce it reliably, very cost effectively, which is crucial for being able to really dive into the potential applications.
right, right. So we have an idea of what DSIP is. Um, let's delve into how it was discovered. Why don't you take us back to 1970s, right?
All right, yes. So the story starts in Switzerland with a research group trying to understand sleep. And they were actually inducing sleep in rabbits using low frequency electrical stimulation of specific areas in the brain called the interlaminar thalamic nuclei. And what they noticed was that the blood taken from the rabbits' brains while they were sleeping could actually induce sleep in other
Hmm,
rabbits. Yeah, so that's the basis for it.
that's kind of wild. So they knew that something in the blood was responsible for that sleep effect.
Precisely. And they managed to isolate the substance and found that when they infused it into recipient rabbits, it led to the kind of brainwave activity on an EEG that we associate with
Hmm.
deep sleep. And the slow, powerful delta waves. And they also observed a reduction in the rabbit's movements. And so that's how delta sleep induced peptides got its name, DSIP.
Hmm.
And they even figured out the exact amino acid sequence we mentioned earlier, which aids in further research.
So the initial focus of this peptide was very much on sleep. Paper mentions a significant study that was done by Lyer et al. 1988. And what exactly did that research actually reveal?
Yeah, it was pretty substantial for the conclusive evidence of the first study. And so, Lyer and his team showed in rats that when DSIP was administered, it not only increased the amount of slow wave sleep that deep delta wave, sleep induces, but it also facilitates the release of growth hormone,
Whoa.
which is typically secreted during the sleep stage.
And is
And
super important for
mhm.
everything from biologic process to lifespan.
Oh, yeah, and what's particularly compelling was that when they used antibodies to block the action of DSIP in sleep-deprived rats, they didn't see the usual increase in deep sleep and growth hormone, so that kinda suggests the body's own DSIP actually plays a direct role in these processes currently, even if you're
Hmm.
not taking the substance.
That's pretty
Mhm.
solid evidence for its initial sleep kind of related function or influence. But it wasn't all like smooth sailing from there on out, was it? Like the paper highlights some pretty significant hurdles in the research. Um, and what were some of those challenges that they faced?
Yeah, they were pinning down the exact mechanisms. They were trying to, and it got pretty tricky. For a long time, researchers couldn't identify the gene responsible for producing DSIP in mammals. They couldn't find specific receptors that DSIP would actually bind to, which is like a pretty fundamental piece of the, puzzle. It's kind of like trying to understand how a key opens a door without knowing what the key looks like or what kind of lock it fits into. It's practically impossible at that point because you just don't have enough information fundamentally.
Right, right. Um, so, and then there was like the issue of stability
Yeah.
as well, which DSIP breaks down really, really quickly in the lab with a half-life of actually only about 15 minutes due to a specific enzyme. This made it pretty difficult to actually study and potentially even use therapeutically. Interestingly, though, they did find sequence similarity between DSIP and a protein in a bacterium, which raises some really interesting evolutionary questions about its potential fundamental role.
Oh yeah, for sure. Kind of is suggesting that this type of molecule might have even been conserved across very different life forms, which really highlights how it's kind of
Hmm.
could be a basic component of life itself in biological functionality.
So to overcome that instability um, in the molecule, the paper mentions um, researchers starting to look into DSIP analogs or essentially modified versions that might last longer. They also use several techniques to measure DSIP-like responses in the body. Over time, the research was eventually expanded beyond just sleep because of some of those DSIP-like effects that they were noticing were not just sleep related. So, what were some of those other areas that were starting to garner some attention?
Yeah, so the research really broadened the scope to explore DSIP's potential roles in a whole range of various physiological processes, like including things like regulating hormones, like they observed, and how the body responds to stress, managing pain, and like even protecting nerve cells.
Mm,
And, and on the topic of stress, the paper actually highlights some particularly interesting findings.
mm.
Hmm.
It does mention that the DSIP has been shown to, and this is one of the things that I particularly found interesting here, but it mentions that DSIP has been shown to normalize brain metabolism and that has been disrupted by chronic amphetamine exposure
Ah.
and uh, kind of like levelize and normalize those neurological processes. So, what could that possibly tell us about his role in regards to stress in the body?
I mean, that's a pretty significant finding. It's, chronic amphetamine exposure can really disrupt the delicate balance of neurotransmitters and energy utilization in the brain. And the
Mm.
fact that DSIP could help restore the
Yeah.
balance suggests a potential role in mitigating the neurological damage caused by stress.
So the damage caused by the unnatural increase and
Mhm.
overutilization of neurotransmitters.
Yeah, it has a wonderful regulatory effect on
Mm,
the brain. Mhm.
interesting. Um, and it does go on to say even after that it can regulate not only that, but it can regulate the activity of the monoamine oxidase
Yeah.
through its or the MAO, through its interaction with the serotonin and androgenic systems. For those that don't know, MAO is a enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters in the synapse, and MAOA is primarily responsible for breaking down serotonin as well as norepinephrine and noradrenaline, and um, and only as a secondary responsibility breaks down dopamine,
Mhm.
but it primarily goes after serotonin, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. And then MAOB is the one that's primarily responsible for breaking down dopamine as well as PEA and a few others.
Yeah.
Um, and So all of that is crucial for both allowing sleep to even happen as well as mood regulation and that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, and by regulating MAO activity, DSIP could potentially help maintain optimal levels of those important neurotransmitters. And this could really contribute to its observed effects on mood, sleeps, and the body's ability to really handle that stress.
Hmm.
You know?
And there was even more direct evidence for its stress handling and protective potential. Um, the paper mentions a study that was done with what was it? Dalteron, I think. Delteron, yeah.
Delteron, yeah, and that was a pretty significant finding. A DSAP-containing preparation called Delteron was shown to significantly improve the survival rates of stress-susceptible rats when they were exposed to acute stress. And this really is highlighting and underscoring the potential of DSIP in helping the body cope and recover from stressful situations. And the development of methods to produce recombinant DSIP and E. coli was also a pretty big step forward because it allowed for more detailed studies. And it's really interesting that Delteron has been used clinically in Russia for things like managing withdrawal symptoms and even
Hmm.
helping kids with central nervous system function after cancer treatment.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just to be clarify, this is not to be confused with Dalteron, which is a Star Wars planet.
Yes.
uh,
That's funny.
um,
Nice crossover there.
thank you. That's I mean, that's honestly some pretty significant real world applications for it, especially given the fact that like the biggest killer of human beings is our own damn stress.
Exactly. Oxidative stress, those
Mm.
stressors really have such a negative and real physiological effect on our health that can destroy the later years of your life.
Yeah.
Genuinely, if those aren't dealt with and managed properly. So stuff like this that's helping with and what's interesting is that when it comes to withdrawal, it doesn't always have to be drug withdrawal. It can be withdrawing from situations, from different environments that aren't healthy, but you really need that, connection with it sometimes, but it's bad, and so that it can even help on a multivariable scale
Yeah.
in different dimensions when it comes to, just like your, the stuff that you're eating, like, when it comes to, like, sugar withdrawal, like, it could even help with, even potentially, like, food cravings,
Mm.
If you're really trying to go on that healthy diet, something
Yeah.
like this can actually help with the withdrawal symptoms from having a less sugar-based and processed food-based diet,
Yeah.
which is pretty huge,
And in our fast-paced society, like the potential for stress and antagonizers and whatnot
Mhm.
is like greater
Yeah.
than ever.
Oh, definitely.
Obviously we don't have as quite a immediate life-threatening visceral problems as when we were, you know, running from bears and lions and whatnot, back in
Yeah.
the day.
Exactly. Yes, we've developed a couple of different neuromechanisms to handle this more complex world.
Right.
Even though sometimes we still run into bears, man.
So let's dive deeper into the research findings.
Who's in the bear?
What is the research shown about its
Oh, yeah.
role in sleep, kind of beyond those initial studies that were done on it?
All right. So, while those early studies were promising, the picture on sleep has become a bit more complex because some later studies didn't find actually a strong link between giving DSIP and significant changes in sleep patterns. And there were even instances where DSIP even seems to impair sleep. And this could be due to the differences, to how it's administered, the dosage, the animal species studies, and the peptides also instability. So there's a lot of factors at play here.
Mm. So it's not just quite as straightforward as it being a simple sleep drug.
No, no, not really. But however, there was a study by Schneider-Helmert and colleagues in 1981 that reported a statistically significant improvement in sleep quality among individuals with insomnia who were treated with DSIP, which suggests that in specific populations, particularly those with sleep disturbances, DSIP might indeed have a beneficial effect on sleep. And so, as we
Hmm.
discussed earlier, another study looked at the people with schizophrenia and found a correlation between higher levels of DSIP like substances in their spinal fluid and correlated that with deeper stages of sleep.
Interesting. So while it's not a universal sleep aid necessarily, it seems like DSIP might actually play a little bit of a more nuanced role in the body, depending on the individual and their specific needs, as well as
Mhm.
their specific deficits and circumstances. Um, and so let's touch on the neuroprotective aspects again. The paper mentioned some interesting animal studies. In the animal models of brain ischemia, the which is like a stroke where the blood flow to the brain is restricted. DSIP was shown to have neuroprotective effects. Studies also reported improved motor function as well as reduced mortality in animals treated with DSIP after
Mm,
experiencing ischemia. And it also was observed to reduce neuronal activity and enhance blood flow in the brain of stressed animals,
mm,
kind of like you were mentioning earlier, but in this case, stressed animals undergoing ischemia.
yeah,
And the antioxidant properties potentially by reducing free radicals in the
yeah.
nervous system
Mhm.
are another kind of key component there of its neuroprotective potential.
Yeah, and there was that study with rats exposed to chronic low oxygen conditions
Hmm.
or hypobaric hypoxia, and that was pretty fascinating because they found that phosphorylated forms of DSIP or PDSIP actually improved the rat's performance in the Morse water maze.
Mm,
That was the test of
spatial
spatial memory.
awareness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
spatial
Or yeah,
awareness.
spatial. Yeah.
And this improvement was linked to changes in the levels of key neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in brain regions critical for memory and cognition.
Mm,
Yeah.
that kind of highlights the potential cognitive benefits as that we were discussing
Mhm.
earlier. Um, but also makes it seem like DSLP's influence extends far beyond just making you like sleepy
Oh,
and
yeah, for sure. It's involved in like stress response, pain modulation, potential neuroprotection, and even endocrine regulation paints a picture of a pretty multifaceted neuropeptide with significant therapeutic potential and biological interactions for, you know, benefit and health.
no kidding. That's
Yeah.
uh, got a
Mhm.
pretty widespread application there in the body. Um,
Seriously.
while we're kind of running a bit long here towards the end of it, but let's quickly go ahead and touch on some of the potential applications and future directions as kind of outlined by the paper.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So papers talking about the potential applications are pretty broad, ranging from treating sleep disorders and managing stress and mood disorders and pain relief and neuroprotection in conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and even addiction treatment. And the early findings in cancer prevention and anti-aging are also
mm.
very intriguing, even though they're pretty preliminary.
And the paper does makes sure to emphasize that the preclinical and some of the clinical findings were promising. There still needs to be a lot more research done to fully understand this stuff, especially large scale clinical trials.
Oh, yeah.
To validate a lot of the applications, as well as discover like exactly what the mechanisms are of this thing, because even like with our current understanding of it and kind of the effects that we've noticed, we still don't seem to kind of have a full like grasp of its mechanisms of action here.
Yeah.
Um,
Because they really need to identify those really elusive receptors and, mapping out kind of the complete signaling pathways and
mhm.
developing also a more stable version of DSIP to enhance its
Oh
therapeutic
yeah,
potential
for
because
sure.
it's still very unstable as a compound.
Yeah, I don't even know how that would be transformed. I'm sure they've done a little bit of stabilizing it,
Yeah.
but in the drug version that was released in Russia, but
Mhm.
unless that was like a major improvement, I don't see
Yeah.
how that could be very practical in a real world setting just
Yeah.
because of how often you would have to administer it.
Yeah, how often
Um,
as well as, we would really need to know its mechanisms of action, its receptor interactions. It's just we know so little, but we know that there is such a that bioavailability aspect and the just the overall benefit,
Yeah.
physiological, bodily, and mental health. So it's pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
That's um the I feel like we know so much, but we know so little about it.
Yep, that's it. There's way too much information out
Mm.
there. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, that gives us a little bit more of a detailed picture here in a
Mhm.
fascinating world of the DSIP or delta sleep inducing peptide.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully we'll get a way for you guys to read the full paper because there's a lot
Mhm.
more studies that we didn't cover here and a lot more research that was
Definitely.
done on it that makes it super fascinating and potentially
Mhm.
a lot of applications. So
Oh, yeah.
um, we are going to go to a break here and we'll see you guys in a short bit, probably about 5-10 minutes.
Alright. Peace.
Well, we will whenever one of us changes the theme.
Yeah.
Oh,
about it.
Okay, well, welcome back,
Hello.
everyone. Welcome back to the second half of
Okay,
ThetaWave
I know.
podcast. For the first time in a long time, we've been able to get to the free flow section.
Yes.
So we were able to cover everything the first hour,
Mhm.
and now we are in our free flow state,
So we get to talk about
the ThetaWave state.
Ooh, ThetaWave.
Mhm.
Nice, relaxed,
Mhm.
spread out, forming new memories every time we
Shake, spreading your thoughts wide.
Yes. Anyways, we're gonna stop acting like we're high. Anyways,
So Jacob
yes, I want.
mentioned he wanted to talk about free will.
Yes, first I want to get your opinion on some ideas that I have surrounding free will because kind of on a baseline level, it's pretty much like logically reasonable to assume that we don't really have a free will from a physics perspective all the way down to almost like an epistemologist perspective, where the nature of the truth of free will is in fact that we don't have it. You
I'd
know?
say the nature of our sequential existence
Mhm.
is
Suggests that.
is that we don't have free will. Like the um, reality in which we experience with a one dimensional time
Mhm.
is that lack of free will is inherent.
Yeah. And that goes kind of an interesting direction because you have to if you it's kind of like Einstein's block universe where kind of each stream of time of space-time is just a tiny little sliver, a little like almost like a hair that goes kind of across this block universe and is actually in a very stagnant state of existence. But and from that perspective, I it's almost as if the sequential aspect of our existence is in and of itself an illusion meant to kind of just allow for I don't know. It allows for conscious experience. If there was no aspect of time involved, we wouldn't be able to have this kind of dynamic existence. And so it's necessary. But when you step outside of that into kind of the more uh where everything kind of exists in in potential, there it starts to get a little confusing for me because when it comes to the nature of our own personal will, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's so many pre-environmental factors, so many genetic factors, experience factors. Like you talk to any psychologist, you tell them everything about your life leading up to like 5, 6 years old. They can check back in you 30 years later and still, and predict exactly how you're going to be like with incredible precision. So we are very like mechanistic creatures, but there's also something causally real about it. It's as if we like to assign this random variability to our decisions in a way that allows us to be like, okay, well, of course we have free will. I can make decisions. You can't make decisions out of the will that already exists within you. It's already determined, yet it's still real and dynamic and filled with infinite potential for yourself.
Well, there's like yes, like I mean that's from my perspective is accurate, and there's these kind of layers to decision making that I kind of view
Mhm.
as you have your uh your biological components,
Yeah.
um, and those factors that kind of play a very just kind of base role there, and you have your experiential component layer, that influences your decision making
Yeah.
and has probably a much larger like range of impact
Mhm.
on it. And then you have your your experiences currently and your future experiences that are going to shape those.
Mhm.
And what is difficult about predicting is you can predict certain components are likely to be true regardless of
Yeah.
experience given a specific situation.
Mhm.
Most components of decision making, especially the more specific you get about somebody's decisions, most components are going to be incredibly difficult to predict in a future context without knowing all of the
Mhm.
different environmental factors and circumstances that will lead up to it, because those are all going to shape that environmental layer that is going to be the thing that makes that end decision, right?
Mhm.
So for us, I think if we were able to understand completely somebody's life circumstances, biology, history, and every one of their experiences that they've had, and we were to map that out, let's say with a quantum computer or something like that, given any set of circumstances, we would be able to predict in real time what their decision was going to be.
Mhm.
Given that capability, it's logical to assume that we could start predicting like sequences of actions upon actions upon actions, like given the next action that we predicted, let's predict the next one after, that next one after that. The problem with that lies in our lack of ability to predict the environment in that situation.
It's incredibly difficult to
So
navigate.
you would literally need to have a quantum computer that was predicting every single component that of existence
I think you would need like
in order to accurately predict somebody's in order to completely accurately predict somebody's life
I
choices.
think that you would need almost like sextillions of qubits within a quantum computer to do that. It's the environmental complexity in relation to like quantum like theory is insanity. It's insanity. Like we're
You're essentially creating another
Yeah.
universe,
Mhm.
because you're utilizing quantum computing, which is infinite possibility, in order to predict infinite possibility.
Mhm. And then it also begs the philosophical question of whether that determined outcome was there in the first place before that collapse of potentiality that was there in the first place. And so, is this really the only way it could be determined, or the way that it chose to be determined in this world? And maybe in a different world, there's multiple streams of different potential outcomes. And if all of those are coexisting, which one is the deterministic one? Or are they all deterministic? Or is there potential deterministic factors that only can exist within predefined states, or are those defined states have high levels of unknown variabilities even from, like, our own like, even if we do have that complete quantum understanding of it, you know?
Yeah, I view it kind of as until there is perfect data, it is
Mhm.
a range of likely probabilities, and those probabilities are going to be more accurate the more data that you have. And so eventually those probabilities factors you start getting from like a bunch of different probabilities to some eventually reaching
Mhm.
zero, or like close to zero as your data increases, and you end up with a couple like really likely outcomes. And then in the most ideal situation, when if you have perfect data, you have one single outcome that is 100% and everything else is
Mhm.
0%.
Yeah.
But in order to get that, you essentially have to do the equivalent of creating a hypothetical reproduction of the universe.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, as far as we know, not going to be possible.
Yeah, and, life might be currently intelligible, but and our experience and the mathematics behind our cosmic understanding of reality. But who's to say when we do kind of reach that unified theory, if it even is in and of itself comprehensible? There's no reason for the universe to be intelligible, kind of like Einstein said. And perhaps that the intelligibility that we can perceive and the logic that we can understand is simply a fiction created in order for the useful navigation of biological organisms instead of actually a real foundational aspect of the universe. I do think that it is real in the sense that it's 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 a part of a true system that works within environments, but what presupposes the environments might be completely different than anything we've ever seen before. And once we have that complete quantum understanding of reality potentially in the next like 200-300 years, what goes beyond that might be something so radically different, just like how quantum mechanics was so radically different from general relativity. You know, it's
Mhm.
going to have such we just don't know. There's so much you don't know, you know?
Mm.
So and perhaps when we do reach that, we'll understand that, oh, there really is this one singular, propagation mechanism that the universe follows that is completely mechanistic and completely predetermined. But until then, it's really just we might not even be using the right vocabulary here to describe what that even is, you know? Just a
Yeah.
very approximate representation of it.
There is and I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but there was a period of time that I found it very difficult to come to terms with the lack of free will, um,
Mhm.
and the lack of ability to really control anything because, our circumstances define us and what are the decisions that we make. And in any given circumstance, I'm going to make the decision that, I was set up to make.
Yeah.
And um, it was very hard for me to come to terms with that. But um, eventually I started looking at it as a almost like I'm experiencing a movie or a story. Like I'm on a ride down a river. I can't
Mhm.
control like the direction of the current and like where it's taking me, but I can watch it happen.
Yeah.
Like,
You can enjoy the experience
yeah,
in and of itself.
exactly.
And,
It's a beautiful view.
it's like we're defined by our environments, but our experience of those environments are determined by us. It's as if there's this, uh, more almost, foundational interplay between us as agents and the, mechanistic direction of the universe. It we have such a unique experience in that we're more than just particles. We have qualia. We have experience that is unlike anything that's within the universe as we know of. And what that represents for us
In what
is
way, or do we have? In what way?
that, as opposed to like a photon, whose life is very short to itself, it doesn't have any actual real experience, you know? It's its life is completely mechanistic, as opposed
Mm,
to us who has an experience of a mechanistic life that allows us to have this slightly altered way of interacting with the world because of our awareness. And like you said, now we can enjoy the ride.
mm,
It's quite the show that the universe
mhm.
is putting on for us, and we should really enjoy it,
Yeah.
truly. And if we do, I think that the question of free will, do we have it or not, is going to be completely irrelevant when we see the grandeur and true beauty of what actually is there,
Mm.
you know?
You want to hear a crazy thought?
Okay. Yes, definitely. Love
So,
crazy thoughts.
our brains are essentially recording mechanisms for our experience, right?
Mhm. I
We
like
have
that.
interactions with the environment around us that cause reactions, and we record our experiences within our brains,
Yeah.
and that we are a history of our experience. If you think about it in that context, we are not that different from things such like, for example, the sun, a celestial object, in the sense that the sun has interactions with things, creates reactions, and based off of those interactions and reactions, records its experience.
Mhm.
Like its current state is a
Yeah.
reflective of its interactions.
Mhm.
And the same with everything else. An asteroid hurtling
Yeah.
through space
Oh, yeah.
is a product of its interactions and its experiences. and the that stuff all gets recorded on in its essence. And so in that sense, we're not all that different than anything else out there. Like, our
Mhm.
brains are just fancier biological ways of recording that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Which, and that's such an interesting thing to to really think about, because if we simply are just a more complex way of something, of forms of interaction that exist on every single level, what does that mean for our relationship with those things
Right.
and their relationship with us? I know they don't have a perspective, but what's their basis of interaction with the world in relation to more primary and simple mechanisms?
Hmm.
And, that's where a panpsychist would say, "Hey, that's where everything's conscious." And it's like, well, I don't think
Yeah,
that's the
no.
case.
I mean, the
But
difference is that we have sensory inputs,
Mhm.
um,
Different.
which things like asteroids don't have. They do record experiences and whatnot, but they don't
Aliens
have
on them do.
the sensory inputs, in order
Yeah.
to be able to
Mhm.
input information without um, directly experiencing
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, I guess why I think, integrated information theory is the best way, currently at least, of explaining how consciousness plays a role in, environments and in life, because it kinda gives a really good mathematical representation. It's it helps us understand how AI is not conscious at all, because the when you do the mathematics, the integrated information of an AI algorithm is negligible. It's nothing, it's compared to, like, almost like a rock. And so we there's kind of this uniqueness when it comes to nature's expression of sensory input and data manipulation, bringing that to that awareness. It's really special, and it it makes you really wonder where it stems from. We understand so little about the brain, and we know even smaller amounts of information about where it truly came from, the beginnings of such an origin. Like we there's still so much mystery out there, like, truly, and before we uncover it, I think we can live a life that is in this nice delusion of pretending we have free will, but at the end, we'll realize that we landed where we were always supposed to be, not where we were forced to be. There's a difference there. We weren't forced to go in a direction, we were always meant to. It
Well,
was as it should be.
forced implies a will
Exactly.
behind it.
Mhm.
M- Meant to implies no will, just end result.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I would say like that's the
Mhm.
case. Like, nobody forced us anywhere because nobody forced anything.
Yeah.
There's no force to force anything. Like, it's just a matter of we ended up where we were always going to end up. Like,
Mhm. Yeah. Like, I don't know if have you
I
watched.
am where I am because of where I was. That's the kind of
Yes,
statement it
exactly.
was. It is.
And, have you watched, Spaceman, that movie, with, um it's with that spider in space
What
in the spaceship?
running down my face? What running different ways? What ways? What like a tear in space? You don't know that song?
I don't think I know that song. I'm sorry,
Oh my gosh.
but you haven't watched Spaceman.
No, I haven't.
Oh, I would totally recommend it. It's such a good one. But pretty much the alien spider would always be like, "Why worry? The universe is as it should be." And that's kind of the approach I've taken to life ever since, because that movie honestly radically changed my perspective on some things, especially when it came to the acceptance of how life and the universe genuinely propagates forward, and how it is forever changing and dynamic, but also but fundamentally a from beyond our interface, from what it objectively is, even at the smallest scale. It's it's simply almost a it is a almost stagnant aspect that we get to have the privilege of traveling through what really shouldn't be there in the first place, you know?
Mhm.
It's wonderful. It's such an incredible opportunity.
There is a beautiful truth to the words, "It is what it is."
Mm. It is what it is. You just gotta accept the absurdity of life,
Mhm.
you know? But honestly, what's more absurd is that it isn't absurd, that we can kinda make sense of it, you know? That's
It's
what
absurd how sensible it is.
it truly, truly, and getting to make sense of it is probably one of the main driving forces to why, I enjoy learning about physics, neuroscience, our brain, our experience and the experiences of not the experiences, but the forces around us and what those
Here's
entail
a
too.
question.
Okay.
Are we just a filter traveling through chaos?
I you know, I would say that, I mean, we're a free energy minimization machine that is able to take the high levels of entropy that exist in constant states around us and conform that to a singular physical and macroscopic representation of the world. So I would say, yeah, I think we would be. I think we could say that's the case. You know. Now, I mean, it makes you wonder if the universe fundamentally wanted that in the first place. Maybe it was always trying to express consciousness that it could learn to understand itself.
I am chaos. Now come to me, filter.
Yes. It's kind of similar. I did flirt with the idea of our brain actually being a filter of consciousness.
Did it flirt back?
Uh, it gave me a little kiss on the cheek
Mm.
and then kinda left for a while, and so I'm still trying to see if it'll come back to me. But if it does, 'cause I am definitely considering analytical idealism that the world around us that we exist in is actually secondary to our primary conscious experience. And the question of what came first isn't exactly relevant, rather it was a culmination of both the the experiences of organisms that then has a physical representation that's secondary to the organism that then represents its interactions in this kind of more mental substrate.
Mm.
And I like to think that because I'm very much like information based when it comes to the fundamentals of reality. I think everything is information.
Mm.
And if that information is represented digitally, what's the difference between that and consciousness? You know?
Yeah.
That's kind of my logic currently, but I we'll kind of see how that all develops over time.
Yeah. Hmm. I think there's another, and we've already kind of visited that question a little while ago of like
Yeah.
what is consciousness and like and that kind of thing. But there's I don't know if we actually touched on the component of consciousness that is the sensory sensory input driving
Mhm.
uh decision making actions
Mhm.
um element of it. Like there,
Yeah.
then that is something that is kind of feels like a little bit of an integral component in what we kind of use to define something that is alive versus not alive. And, you know, and while we don't typically think of it in the terms of consciousness, because most people, you know, probably wouldn't say that they think animals are conscious, but
Which
like,
is pretty insane.
right. But like, I think that component is kind of part of
Yeah.
consciousness. Like it's that inherent. There's more to it, like the self-referential processing we were talking about like last
Mhm.
time. But like the one thing we didn't talk about was that sensory input that's driving action
Yeah.
on the external,
And
because that rocks don't have that.
yeah,
You
exactly.
know.
They don't have a relationship with the sensory experience of the world around you.
Mm-hmm.
Bacteria have a relationship
Mm-hmm.
with the sensory input of the world around them, their particular world and their specific functions, and I think they're fundamentally aware of only those. They don't have, the self-referential processing that humans do, but you don't
Mhm.
necessarily need that, you know? I know we also talked about, like, kind of like the gradient, you know? If there's this high level of conscious experience, at what point is there some arbitrary, like, hit where consciousness
Mhm.
explodes? Like, what at what point does it arise, or does it develop from a
Mm.
relationship with sensory experiences from very simple
So, in
bacteria?
other words, do we define, um do we define consciousness as as with that component of the based decision making, or the sensory input based actions and decision making, or is that how we define life and we define consciousness as an extra component
Yeah.
within that mix? And so,
Mhm.
in order to determine that, we would probably have to determine what level of self-referential processing things like microorganisms and bacteria have,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
if there is a component of understanding there, if it is just simply action, or like input action, or if there is an
Mhm.
element of input, like action me, input action me, like, kind of
Mhm.
like, um an element of placement within the environment.
Mhm. You know, it's, I'm gonna borrow a little bit from the panpsychists here. So, panpsychists like to randomly just assign a certain amount of qualia to every single subatomic particle there is, and which personally I think is ludicrous,
Mhm.
but I think there might actually be something there with the kind of with the genetic propagations of organisms where, uh, after each kind of higher level of integration, there's actually an aspect of conscious experience that's associated with the functional awareness that's necessary, or not even necessary, but, just, almost intrinsically in with the organic functions of even simple life,
Mhm.
you know, where it's not that there are subatomic particles that have consciousness, but the consciousness is assigned with the as a direct byproduct of organic propagation, you know?
Mhm.
That's kind of where I would kinda say, like, okay, I can kinda see that being what exists there. Now the mechanisms behind that, we have no clue, and why that's the case,
Well,
we wouldn't either.
what's interesting is we can kind of map out how that looks in the
Mhm,
human brain as far as like our self-referential processing and what happens when an input goes from our senses, like up to our nerves, like into our brain, and then gets processed through um, our feature extraction portions of our brain networks, depending on what the sensory input is, and then
mhm,
going into the amygdala and cortex and basal ganglia and whatnot, and follow that route of like kind of processing that happens, and with it, that that loop that allows for a self-referential component, right? We can
mhm.
follow that kind of information flow to that loop.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
basal ganglia is like a big portion of what allows that.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that's the only way for that to be
Oh, for
achieved.
sure.
And just because something doesn't have a basal ganglia doesn't mean that it doesn't have the ability
Like,
to
personally, I think
self-referential
yeah, I think
processing.
there is a consciousness that exists within your enteric nervous system, your gut. I mean, those hundreds of millions of neurons are acting automatically and progressing in relation with you and are sending you how to respond to their own, ways of interacting with the world, and if you're eating the right things, and its roles it's playing, it's all sending that emotional response up to your amygdala, through the vagus nerve, which it makes you really wonder. It's like all of these hundreds of millions, this hundreds of millions of neurons are completely automatic. They're by themselves doing their own thing. Why would they not have this experience that would be associated with their own sensory perceptions?
Mhm.
I think that that's totally a viable option, even if
Mhm.
it's, still speculative at this point. I think it's something that should be
Or even
deeply
if it's
considered.
basic.
Mhm. Yeah, and if we're gonna assign consciousness to bacteria, I think microbiota would also be something that we should consider, as well as the more complex interactions with, themselves and then the enteric nervous system all integrated into one.
Mm. And
That
I
seems
think
reasonable.
I think adaption is something that we have, maybe without realizing it, come to understand as a vital component of what we would probably be finding as consciousness, the ability to adapt to an environment, and through stimulus, through some sort of stimulus caused adaption.
Yeah.
And for us, that is a very complex system that happens because we have a lot of sensory inputs and a lot of processing that happens. But microorganisms adapt, you have cells adapt, there might even be, I don't know enough about this to know for sure, but I assume that there are adaptive sensory components within plants.
Yeah.
Which gives you begs the question, is this a simple non-looped mechanism that is simply adjusting itself, or is this mechanism adaptable and dynamic, and can it change over time given enough
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think about, because, 80% of our synaptic connections of the hundreds of trillions we have are glutamatergic. What do plants use? Glutamate to interact with and develop, and send signals to each other. And it's like, well, if that's kind of the main components of our biology, there's probably some correlation with consciousness there. And if that's the case, would there also be a correlation between that and the same glutamatergic systems within plants?
Exactly. So the question, are plants conscious at any level? And
No.
then do we need to reevaluate all of our ethical systems and values that we hold because of this new understanding? Because okay, you either have to be okay with killing other consciousnesses, and which is, in my opinion, is fine. It's the primary,
kill me, that's fine.
the primary species. If there's a species that was more dominant than humans and they wanted to eat me, there's nothing I can do about it. It's my place in the ecosystem. So
and it's sad. You want to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, I'd run away, but that I'd understand.
I mean, I think there are some ethical considerations we should always consider when it comes to that stuff. But mowing the grass isn't
that's
murder.
That's mass planticide right there.
Exactly. So I don't think we'll need to reevaluate mowing the lawn, but maybe cutting down entire forests. Maybe that's really something that is beyond an environmental effect, but actually is
I think that's a practical problem too. It's
multifaceted for sure.
We need plants and trees to make oxygen for us in order for us to live. So if you don't have them and we keep on knocking them all down, that's not going to be good for us.
Yeah, probably not the best. But I mean, who knows? Maybe it is good for us essentially, but I don't know.
Maybe we'll adapt to need less oxygen.
Exactly, just slowly over time.
Yeah,
maybe we can have kind of a carbon dioxide based existence. I mean, I don't think that's possible within the next couple of million years.
Maybe we can
after that
utilize something else. We can utilize gas, methane.
Yes, just breathe. Just drink methane. Honestly, sounds wonderful. Or just take an oxygen pill. I guess that's synthetically made. Maybe that's what you do. Or it's kind of like how the Lorax. It's kind of your air.
Gonna say that reminds me, how cool would it be to be able to have a night's sleep in a pill? So you could essentially take a pill and it would give you the equivalent of a night's sleep.
That would be incredible. That's one of our long-term goals that we need Like, I don't care what we have to sacrifice, what we have to do, we're getting that pill.
Oh
We're
my
getting that
gosh.
pill.
Then we never have to sleep. We just
Never have to
wouldn't have to waste any
Ex
more time
no
sleeping.
wasted time, just full incredible experience, always 24/7.
Because I love like the feeling of a good
Oh.
night's sleep and the rest and like integration and whatnot, all the benefits that it provides. But I don't like spending all that time doing it. Like,
I know, seriously. You know, there's a certain psychological condition where, you know, where if you live a very busy life, you know, you kind of wanna stay up late so you actually have some alone
hmm
time. And that's very much me,
or if
now,
you're like me,
you
you
know?
like staying up late
Mhm.
so that all of your time is pretty much alone time.
Exactly, you know? You know, it would be also nice to be able to, you know, spend all night researching, doing whatever you need to do, working on stuff, and then, you know, taking a pill that morning to continue
And
with
then
your
being
day,
able
go
to
for a
like do
stroll,
the
you know?
social part of
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
and still have enough energy to be totally fine while doing it. Dude, this is we're working on this. We're working on this. I think there's a way to do it.
And I think what's more than likely is that perhaps the solution will primarily reside in a uh, um, in electrical stimulation and modulation of the brain. If we
Oh,
can
yeah.
figure out a way to achieve the right brain states and increase the frequency, or maybe even the amplitude, depending on how that affects things, the amplitude or the frequency of the sleep cycle. I could see it being possible that we get a more efficient
Mhm.
um, sleep cycle and a faster sleep cycle.
Yeah, even if there's a way to, like, minimize it to, like, 30 minutes, I
Yeah,
think that would be
like
huge.
that would be acceptable. That's fine. I can
Mhm.
sleep 30 minutes. Like,
Yeah, like an automatic way to just instantly, boom, fall asleep as almost if you're kinda like a robot in a
turn
while, just
yourself
like
off.
off button, you know, have that 30 minutes where it does very incredibly quick, you know,
Very
integrated, like,
efficient.
information processing to get to the point, and through, you know, other means, you keep your stress levels low, your health good, you know, all these other factors can play that also can reduce sleep, so you really just need that information processing to happen as quickly and efficiently as possible, you know?
And that's how humanity became addicted to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
They got so efficient that they just loved it so much they kept on doing it.
Like, you don't even need it, but you're just like, "Oh, I love just
You
laying
know what?
down."
My brain's feeling slightly
Mhm.
less than optimal. I'm gonna go for a 30-minute sleep.
Yeah, seriously. And I generally think all of the research we're doing into nootropics will give us a pretty good comprehensive
Oh yeah,
understanding of the direction we need to go in for that.
yeah. And also like if we can find a way
Mhm.
for
Oh my
people
gosh, yes.
and practical, that means we have a lot more data to work
Mhm.
with that kind of thing.
Yes. And I know we've kinda what was that one product that we were talking about? Like the
Yeah, we were talking about
hat
trying
or the
to
beanie?
integrate one of those
Mhm.
into a EEG devices
Yeah.
into a beanie or like a hat or something like that. If we are able to find a way to do that with minimizing noise, like the noise interference from other signals, and actually accurately getting a reading, that would mean that no matter what people were doing and were experiencing, they would be able to keep track of their brainwave activity, which would, have tremendous benefits, not only for just data advancement and scientific advancement, but also for their own personal health. So you could
Mhm.
monitor what could be causing
Oh, yeah.
the things you run into.
For sure.
Like imagine running into a consistent emotional response or something like that, and you're able to see kind of a representation of like electrically what's going on in your brain when
Mhm.
that gets triggered.
And then over time, our ability to read and analyze will get better and better
Yeah,
through the
start being
information
able to develop
we get.
AI models for that,
Mhm.
and be that can like diagnose and adapt to individuals and help you understand more about your brain, kind of like a more detailed self-referential process. It's like we're adding sensory like
Exactly, yeah.
adapters and capabilities into our
Mhm.
brain, but through
I think there might even be some
technology.
I definitely want to explore with you some potential ways of noise minimization because I think it's something that genuinely is possible and something
Oh
we
yeah.
can achieve.
Well, I mean, yeah, there are a boatload of things out there in the world that can block an electrical signal.
That's for sure. If we can use it in a way that helps
Yes.
us, that'd be
And
great.
the biggest issue though with it is that the sensitivity required to measure brain activity from outside the brain is really, really difficult to achieve. It's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, graphene is one of the only reasons that we have a hope of being able to do that accurately. Um, and thankfully, graphene is so, like, you can make such thin graphene structures that like single layered graphene structures that you could build sensors that literally are placed right up against your skull, and like underneath your skin and right up against your skull. But again, with that increased sensitivity comes the problem, and that problem is now it's so much easier for it to detect other noise around you as well, and there's a lot like more prominent signals that are all around us than our brain activity. Our brain activity is actually very, very like
incredibly efficient,
quiet. Like it's a very quiet electrical activity, and you have power lines that are just like pumping electricity through them, and those create a lot more noise. And so you have to have a way to almost completely isolate that, which almost requires like a shield that also like presses up against your skull,
Yeah.
Or at least a way to attract and deflect, electrical activity. And so, yeah, that's the kind of the problem with developing consumer level EEGs, but we're going to do it.
We're going to do it.
We're going to do it.
All right. So
All right.
that was a good podcast. Really enjoyed it. Thank you guys for listening. We got some really good topics in. And so stay tuned for the next one.
Finally got to our free flow section. I was so proud of us.
It was awesome too.
That's how we're going to be trying to do these from here on out. We're going to do our first section, which is structured, and we'll kind of break up into videos and release. And then our second section, which will be free flow.
Yeah.
And we'll release that too as its own. So, hopefully we'll start getting some of these podcasts we've done edited soon and posted, and
as soon as possible.
Be looking forward for that. Thank you so much for joining us today, guys. We really appreciate you. And tune in next week.
Yep. Keep riding that theta wave.
Indeed.